From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's coming up. K-State's Stu Duncan will talk about the renewed momentum behind cotton production here in Kansas and about the importance of waiting until soil temperatures and other climatic conditions are right before seeding that new cotton stand. Then K-State's Romulo Lollato will report from the third and final day of the Winter Wheat Tour of Kansas and adjoining states. He'll talk about what tour goers observed yesterday as they inspected fields in western and south central Kansas. And further ahead, this week's K-State Horticulture segment, Raymond Cloyd returns with more alerts about insect activity in landscapes and gardens. All that and more coming right up on this Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. A few moments now on that alternative crop in Kansas that is showing something of a resurgence here in the state of late. That would be cotton. Along with us is K-State crop production specialist Stu Duncan. And Stu, we want to, in a few moments, get into establishing cotton and some of the things that ought to be considered by growers this year, particularly with our weather that we've had. But how do you read this interest in cotton production in Kansas currently?
That's a good question, Eric, and thanks for having me on today.
Sure, you bet.
We kind of had a decline in fall of cotton. We stripped 110,000 acres of cotton in 2006. Since that time, we got into a steady decline because of price pressure, and herbicide drift pressure was really tough. A resurgence in our feed grain prices also led to some of that. You know, our weed control options in corn and sorghum in particular, or wheat fallow, are not necessarily cotton friendly. Cotton is very sensitive to 2,4-D. Most of your listeners are aware of how sensitive soybeans are to dicamba. That's not where I'm going with this, but cotton is also sensitive to dicamba, but 2,4-D to cotton is what dicamba is to soybeans.
They don't get along.
They do not. And you probably won't kill it with drift, but, well, it was just not going to be productive at all. Cotton's a bit different in that it is a perennial crop that we freeze to death every year. We kill it through just in our natural climate, same as grain sorghum in that respect. So it's a tropical crop, but it's been a very profitable. We've had a big resurgence in cotton prices, and we have had a great genetic improvement and specifically trait improvements, but not just traits, but also the genetics of some of our varieties, in particular the 2,4-D tolerant cottons. And we have dicamba-resistant ones, too. But they're not one and the same. You definitely do not want to do that. But that resurgence has allowed growers to, whether they use 2,4-D in that cotton field or not, it will withstand the drift. It's been an insurance policy, and I know that's not a way we like to do things. But when you have the kind of crop we've raised the last 3 years with the prices we've had, it's been certainly a great economic option. One of our farm management fieldmen in south central Kansas had called me 2 years ago and was asking me about the numbers they were seeing. Is this really possible? And I said, it absolutely is.
The agronomics are there.
Yes. Now, and I know we've had somebody thinking, well, they're trying to relate it to changing climate and warming. Our heat units are not any different than they were 15, 20 years ago. They're still just as variable. Mm-hmm. For instance, as we head into this season and planting, last year we would have been safe planting cotton the 1st of May if we'd have wanted to with our soil temperatures. This year, not so much. I hope we can get it in by Mother's Day, which is normally a nice starting date. I don't know if we're going to be warm enough yet.
That's one of the things, Stu, that we wanted to get into in specific today, because cotton is very sensitive to soil temperature and can be vulnerable to chilling injury if that temperature isn't high enough, you say.
Absolutely, Eric. That's a really good point. We've seen it with soybeans in the past. That was the first thing I ever saw chilling injury in, and I've seen it in corn. And what you get is a plant that's, as I was saying earlier, a bit like a chronic calf or a chronic cow. The crop will can emerge, won't grow well during the year, and just doesn't reproduce. And you're not, at least with soybean residue or corn, you could make ensilage out of it, or hay. With cotton, that's lousy hay material. But what can happen right when you first get that seed in the ground, and with our cotton, we want it to be at least 60 degrees, and I'd rather see it 65. The literature will still say up to 68, and some of that will say even to the 8-inch soil depth. Well, we're not going to get to that for ages. If it is, it's going to be too dry to do anything anyway. I really like to keep track with the mesonet or any other place you've got that mesonet, K-State mesonet, which is on our agronomy website. You can find it through there. We have 2 and 4-inch soil temperature depths across the state. It's not exactly the same as your field. And if you're no-tilling, you may be a little cooler in some cases than that. But that average a year ago was above 70 degrees almost the entire month of May at Hugoton, or Moscow, out at the gin where that station is set up. Down at Viola, it was in the mid-70s to 80 most of the month of May.
We're not even close.
This year, not so much. It is the 1st of May, so we've got a lot of time to make up. But our plant window is pretty short because we've got to have that good establishment. It's just so important, cotton, to be an even stand so that you're reaching the reproductive stages, because, again, it's a perennial, and it does not multiple flower at the same site. You have one shot at each one of those flowering sites, so it's running on a calendar, a really pretty accurate heat unit calendar, and up until we get into reproductive stages. When we start blooming, the heat unit calendar is perfect until that point. And that's based on a base temperature of 60 degrees, an average temperature minus 60 degrees. Once we hit that first flower, traditionally in Kansas, and if you look at through the end of the season, we should not be able to raise much over a 2-bale crop, according to the heat unit calendars we've had. We have documented 3.5 and 4-bale yields in places like Hugoton and Moscow, Kansas. I know of over a 3-bale yield near Great Bend last year. You just have to keep a really close eye on it. But you want that early stand to be consistent. It doesn't have to be a solid stand. Mm-hmm. Much like soybeans, it can compensate, or most of our other crops do too, but it doesn't compensate by adding more blooms. It just it can fill in, and you don't want to get too thin, but you'd like to have half of your crop up by 5 to 8 days after you've planted it. And the time leading into that planting date, you'd like to be accumulating about 8 to 10 heat units a day. And without your minimum temperature, your air temperature, and that's all we're going off of, without that dipping down to 50 degrees. And if you get a cold rain, like my word, what we've just got this last weekend again, the soil temperature's below 60 again. I don't know if they were ever above 60. They may have been, 2.5 weeks ago when we had those really warm days. Now, I know we're supposed to get into the 70s and 80s again early next week.
But there's no consistency yet, and so you're saying producers have to monitor that.
They've really got to watch that. We had one cold blip last year. It was 2 days. And again, that first 30 minutes to 2 hours after you put it in the ground is really the most critical. If it gets chilled at that point, if there's good moisture, you still have to get it out of the ground too. But half of your planted stand, that's the best literature I could find, within 5 to 8 days, at least on a dryland field. I think that was dry land. It was in Texas, but at that point, that's what it took to get your top yields. The rest of the year, you could have more of it come up later, and all it was is a weed at that point.
Ask you this, Stu, because of these uncertainties about the soil temperature trends and what's ahead weather-wise, would it be sensible for the cotton grower to adjust their seeding rates upward as a potential compensation for these iffy conditions?
That's a really good question, and I really don't have an answer to that. You could. I think the key thing is getting it right the first time, because cottonseed is not inexpensive.
Right.
It is a pretty good shot of an input, and you're buying it just like corn. You're buying it on a units per bag.
You'd rather producers focus on the climatics.
Really, and couple that with an insurance cutoff and with our weather cutoff. My primo dates were always, I considered them to be, don't do it by the calendar, but between Mother's Day and the 1st of June, actually Memorial Day, we have about a really good 3-week window. It can stretch further than that. If you're in south central Kansas from McPherson south, you're going to have a longer heat unit period.
Stu, you've put together an article on some of these principles that we've been discussing today in an e-update, April the 26th, this past Friday, as a matter of fact. And you've drawn some information from other universities on heat accumulation, this critical nature of that. You would invite producers to have a look at that data.
Oh, absolutely. It's also available, your county extension office, local county office, or district office, either one, they've got that. The website's included on there where I borrowed some of it from North Carolina State, some of it from Cotton Incorporated, and some of it from Oklahoma State, just where they've had more experience and more staff to do that. But those guys at North Carolina State have put together a nice little tool. I suggest you get as many tools as you can to help you.
Absolutely. You're looking for, at the e-update link, soil temperature and forecast are critical for successful cotton stand establishment, which is exactly what we've been discussing with Stu today. Take a look at that at agronomy.ksu.edu, again posted last Friday, April the 26th. Stu, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming over, sharing these thoughts.
Thank you, Eric.
Stu Duncan with us. He is the Northeast Kansas area agronomist for K-State Research and Extension. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and we'll have more after this over the K-State Radio Network. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Welcome back. You are listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Well, the 2019 edition of the Kansas Winter Wheat Tour is just about to wrap up. Tour goers are on their way to Manhattan as we speak during the third and final leg of this year's tour. But we need to catch up on what was observed on the tour yesterday. Romulo Lollato is with us once again via phone. Wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension. He's been good enough to provide us information from the tour this week. Romulo, quickly recap, if you would, the route that your tour group took yesterday through western and then through the southern part of Kansas.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, good morning. So yesterday, if listeners remember the tour, so the second day of the tour, we leave from Colby. Some cars go out west and south. Other cars just go way far south into Oklahoma and then go east. And in our route, we started going east into Gulf County, and from there we just went south to Ford County and straight east back to Wichita. So in that kind of central part of the state, just going back from Colby south into near Garden City and then east into Wichita. So that was the route that we took yesterday.
Well, briefly looking at what the overall tour numbers were from day 2, 200 stops were made, and the calculated yield per acre from all of those tour groups was 47.6 bushels per acre. So, again, not a bad number whatsoever. But, Romulo, among the things that apparently were observed on the tour in day 2, that planting date factor really showed up as a difference maker, you say?
Definitely, Eric. So planting date was we were sampling fields. Our car did 17 stops yesterday, and so the fields that were planted late, right, and those in western Kansas were typically after corn, and in central Kansas were most likely after soybeans, or just after all that October rainfall. We're estimating 15, 20 bushels per acre max in those fields. So they're really far behind. They're maybe still tillering when neighboring fields are close to boot. And so that we believe it's really going to hurt the use of those fields. The early planted fields are actually looking good. Now, they can be deceiving. So I would really encourage producers to really go into their fields and know what they have, because many times one thing that was surprising and kind of consistent on the road yesterday was that the fields are actually looking excellent from the road, but once you walked in, you saw that the stand was quite patchy, so very uneven stands. And once we started doing the stand counts and yield estimates, we were lower numbers of stands per foot than what we had in past years, such as 16, for example. So some of those early planted fields definitely have been a much, much better yield potential than those late planted fields, as you mentioned, but with that caveat that they probably look better than what we were actually estimating in their use, mostly due to really, really suboptimal stands.
Same question as yesterday with those stands that were planted late, and you say the estimated yield from those may be at this point 15 to 20 bushels per acre. If weather from here forward were ideal, that is cool and relatively accommodating for the crop, could those late planted stands improve on the yield potential at all, Romulo?
Well, Eric, I think to some extent, yes. Well, it would definitely be much better than if we turn hot and dry. Mm-hmm. But I think the potential really for those fields are already quite limited, right? Because just a very limited number of tillers out there, a very small crop that is way behind in development. So those things together really limiting the potential of those late planted fields. So the conditions are favorable in the forecast, and I think that will help the crop. So again, if we look at our estimates of yesterday, they are actually very similar to those of 2016. But just keeping in mind that we are at least 2 or 3 weeks behind, or even more, what we were in 2016 when we had a record yield. So although the yield estimates were similar, we are behind as compared to what we had in 2016. Maybe on a more positive note there, we didn't really see much on disease pressure yet. Maybe a couple fields that look like they could have a little bit of wheat streak mosaic out west, but really nothing near what we had in 2017. So still, although we're seeing perhaps a little bit of stunting, a little bit of splattering of those leaves, still a very good yield potential because kind of very minor symptoms. A few cars reported some leaf and stripe rust, especially about Ford through Edwards County there in that region. But again, it was very low levels. So that's a positive note there on the disease side. Very important to keep in mind, though, that if we're starting to find some leaf and some stripe rust, that also means that here in a couple of weeks, when the crop is going to be headed out and perhaps our fungicide window is closing, that we will start seeing more leaf and stripe rust. The conditions are very good now. We have a lot of moisture in the fields. The temperatures are ideal for stripe rust, so we might see that increase here in the next couple of weeks. So producers need to be aware of those fungicide labels and how late they can truly be sprayed, so they are within the label and still getting a good protection of the crop. So just need to be checking for the level of disease development in their individual fields, especially in those planted to susceptible varieties.
Stay vigilant on the potential for rust disease, growers, is the message there. And Romulo, it's reported that, again, on day 2, you and other tour groups observed more stand fertility issues as you traveled through that part of the state.
Definitely. That was, I think, especially apparent in Stafford County and in Edwards County, field after field, that we just don't have that nice uniform green colors, just patches of dark green, neighboring patches of very either a pale yellow if it's a nitrogen deficiency, or just a bright type of yellowing, or as someone in the car said yesterday, a tennis ball green, just that type of green that looks more like a sulfur deficiency. So that was a very common theme yesterday as well. I think that's also limiting the yield potential of those fields. I believe that part of that really is because of the cold temperatures that we have had so far. I mean, the organic matter in the soil is not really mineralizing at the rates that we were used to, and that causes some of that nutrient deficiency that we're seeing as well. Again, especially because we don't have enough heat units, enough temperature for the organic matter to start releasing some of those nutrients. So yes, in those lighter green areas, the crops typically 2 or 3 inches shorter and have significantly fewer stems than in the darker green patches. So yield potential is probably decreased there as well.
Well, tell us what's happening today. Again, you and your group just left Wichita not long ago. You're heading due north. You'll see more fields on your way to Manhattan. And then the groups will assemble one more time. For those not familiar, what's the process once everybody gets back together the final time, Romulo?
So once you get back there in Manhattan, today is a much shorter day. We're gathering about 11 a.m. or so. So everybody's we're going to have a wrap-up and a few comments on the crop there. By now, we should have a pretty good idea where the crop will stand as far as yield and as far as area as well. So each one is going to give their indication of how much they think Kansas will produce. That will be average, and a final production number from the tour will be released probably right after lunch. The area abandonment side of it, which is also a very important component of that final production, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this year we only had about 7 million acres planted of wheat in Kansas, which is the lowest area in 100 years or so. And it was quite surprising to me the amount of fields that were actually sprayed. I mean, it was clear that it was probably sprayed with glyphosate, just terminated. And many of those fields actually in very good shape. I mean, fields that had a very good yield potential, but just terminated, probably to go for a summer crop, likely corn in most of those fields that we saw out west. So that just tells what the economy is pointing out to, right? For producers to perhaps, well, they have subsoil moisture for sure. Now with this week's rainfall, they probably have topsoil moisture as well. So that was an indication. I mean, I think this year on our route we counted a total of 13 fields that had been sprayed, and that's much larger number than what we've seen in the past, where we would see a graze out here and there, but and just sprayed fields, I mean, very rarely. So I don't know. We need to see what the area abandonment is going to be as well. I think that's going to be a very important component on this year's production, especially given how low the area is to start with.
Economics still do rule the day for producers. That is the bottom line. Romulo, if we might, we'll catch up with you one more time once that final projection on Kansas winter wheat production is made by the tour participants later on today, and we will see what that number looks like and some wrap-up thoughts on this tour and its findings. So for now, thank you, and talk again very soon.
Thanks, Eric.
Romulo Lollato from the 2019 Hard Winter Wheat Tour, as again it is in its third and final day with all the tour goers assembling once more in Manhattan later on today to put together their last notes on the tour and come up with estimates on the Kansas wheat crop this year. Agriculture Today continues after this break. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to the Thursday edition of Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson here. For you now, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Senate Finance Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa and other lawmakers are meeting with President Trump at the White House today to talk trade. This comes as Grassley has become more pointed at his comments on tariffs imposed by the U.S. against Canada and Mexico over steel and aluminum shipments. Those duties prompted retaliatory actions by those two countries, including targets on U.S. agricultural products. In a recent op-ed item, Grassley warned that the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement was likely dead without those tariffs being removed by the U.S. against Canada and Mexico. According to Grassley, the president has been very successful in the negotiations with Mexico and China, and in his words, is on the brink of a victory. Grassley added that removing the tariffs would put pressure on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the lower chamber. If the president takes the first step, he says, it then puts the burden back on the House. Well, how quickly would U.S. producers see increased exports if there is a U.S.-China trade agreement? The USDA secretary weighed in on that in this report from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
As U.S. trade officials continue negotiations in China this week, trying to hammer out a trade agreement, some farmers are wondering, even if there is an agreement, how long will it take to recoup their losses from this lengthy trade dispute? Will some of those lost sales end up being permanent? Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue told reporters this week he thinks there will be an immediate step up in U.S. ag sales to China if there is an agreement.
I think the numbers that we are looking at and discussing with China on purchase numbers will be very, very good, and we think it will be multiples of what they've done in the past. It will be very good for American agriculture. Again, the message to China is you're already importing these products. Why not import them for us and help with the trade deficit that we have with your country?
Perdue said he believes a trade agreement would bring almost instant positive results for U.S. farmers, and
President Trump does as well.
In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Kansas cattle and beef producers are being celebrated this month for their hard work building an industry that ranks among the nation's leaders. Todd Domer has more.
The Kansas beef industry is an economic powerhouse, a fact recognized by Governor Laura Kelly in her declaration of May as Beef Month in Kansas. Contributions ranchers and feeders make to the state's economy are highlighted in the Beef Month proclamation. Cattle and calves are the largest economic contributor to the Kansas agriculture sector and one of the largest in the state overall. Kansas Ag Statistics reports cattle generated $8.27 billion in cash receipts during 2017. Those dollars flow through supporting businesses across the state. Kansas ranks high nationally in many cattle and beef production categories. The state was third in the nation in total cattle numbers with 6.35 million head on ranches and in feed yards as of January 1st. Kansas ranks sixth in beef cow numbers with 1.53 million head. The state was second in commercial cattle processed with 6.5 million head in 2017. Meatpacking and prepared meat product manufacturing make up the largest share of the state's food processing sector, which employs more than 18,700 people, according to the Kansas Department of Labor. Kansas was third in the value of beef exported and fourth in hides and skins exported during 2017. All of this justifies honoring those involved in the beef community during May, from cow-calf producers to grazers to feeders, for their hard work making the industry a vibrant contributor to the economy and the state's employment base. I'm Todd Domer.
And we want to take a moment here to congratulate one of our regular visitors here in the broadcast, K-State Range and Pasture Management Specialist Walt Fick. Walt's been recognized by his peers across the country, receiving the Fellow Award from the Society of Range Management at its 72nd annual meeting. This is the highest honor bestowed by that society for advancing the science and art of pasture and range-related resource management. So congratulations to K-State's Walt Fick for that recognition. Very well deserved. Now it's on to this week's Kansas soybean update. And with that is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Mike Steenhoek, Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition, joins us. And Mike, why is it important that the transportation infrastructure projects be looked at and what it can do as far as transportation of agricultural products?
Our multimodal transportation system connects supply with demand. And so for farmers to be an international entrepreneur, to be able to have products that are grown on their farm and consumed halfway around the world, you've got to have this system of rural roads and bridges, highways and interstates, inland waterways, freight rail, and ports to all work in concert to allow those deliveries to occur. So it really is essential to our profitability. If we don't get infrastructure right, farmers won't be profitable.
One issue right now is what we have seen flooding-wise. That's caused some pretty significant issues in some areas.
I don't know of one mode of transportation that has a happy coexistence with flooding conditions, whether it's gravel roads, whether it is rural bridges, whether it is the inland waterway system with barge transportation, railroad track ballast, our ports. All of these modes are being adversely affected by these flooding conditions, and it really is just adding one more obstacle for farmers to get their product to their ultimate customer. And so it's just adding some additional hardship to an industry that already has some headwinds confronting it.
One thing that it helps too is environmentally, because of what it can do and how it can improve that and improve the environment.
Some of these modes of transportation, like barge transportation, you're able to move a heavy volume of product long distances at not only an economical price point, but also at with low carbon emissions. And some of these modes of transportation are really efficient. And so when you've got that system compromised, it obviously results in a more costly system, but a system that has more detrimental impact on the overall environment.
Are you looking at specific goals with regards to future projects?
We continue to explore all of the various modes of transportation. One that we're looking at today is the prospect of moving containerized shipments, containerized exports of soybeans on the inland waterway system. So some of these rivers that feed down to ultimately the New Orleans area. Certainly the state of Kansas could benefit from that with the Arkansas River linking up, and also the Missouri River as well. So there's a number of opportunities to really promote this. And so we look forward to really remaining engaged in this really important issue.
That is Mike Steenhoek, Executive Director of the Soy Transportation Coalition, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg, and this is Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Up now on this Agriculture Today, our weekly look at horticultural management. And along our way once again, horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd, K-State Research and Extension. This is the time of year where his phone rings off the hook as folks are calling in wondering about this bug or that in lawn and garden. And we've got an update on two that we talked of last time, Raymond, and we'll bring in more insects that need some attention as well here. You, again, are receiving calls from folks about getting after those bagworms on landscape junipers. And last time you said, please hold off, and you're going to sing that same refrain here.
I will sing the same refrain, Eric. Hold off. I think really what's happened is people were really taken back by last year's massive infestations that we had. Thousands on trees. And so they're getting a little nervous. They want to pull the trigger. But if you hold off till the end of May, beginning of June, that's when they should be out. And there are no systemic insecticides for bagworms, so don't be looking for those. There's no preventatives that you can use. So again, wait till the little critters are out there, and then you get out there with the sprays and knock yourself out, because that's when it's going to, and that's what you're going to have the biggest impact on those populations. So still hold off. They're not going to be eggs hatching yet. Just hold off. You want to go out there, hand pick some of the bags that are out there, put them in soapy water, and that'll alleviate possible infestations this coming season.
Do not spray until late May, early June, and then to remind what one wants to do is get on a weekly spray regimen for about a month, right?
Yeah, what I did last year, Eric, was when we had so many bagworms on my thujas and junipers, I made weekly applications for 4 weeks with spinosad, thorough coverage of all plant parts. I killed all the bags. They were small, the bagworms, and all my junipers and thujas look great for the rest of the year. But if you wait until they're bigger, then you're going to sustain some damage, and it's too late.
So you can rein them in, but in a timely fashion. That's what we're stressing once more today. Also talked last week about the lilac ash borer. What's the latest on it?
Well, I got an article in our coming newsletter on that, Eric. It's that time, April, May, going to June, where the females will be laying eggs on the bark. Those eggs will hatch into larvae that tunnel into the tree, shrub, and once they're in the tree and shrub, it's too late. So we recommend people make a protective barrier application of something like permethrin or bifenthrin or chlorinatropanol, which is a very safe insecticide to bees, and coat the bark up to 6 feet, and that should protect the trees, and then the same with the shrubs. So, yeah, they're going to be out there laying eggs. You can use pheromone traps, which are what catch the males. So it's that time of year to be cognizant of this. It's a clearwing borer. It's a caterpillar borer. It's not a wood-boring insect. So systemic insecticides are not going to be very effective against it because of where it feeds in the plant.
You need contact insecticides.
Contact, pretty much protective barriers. Once they're in the tree, pretty much other than keeping your plants healthy, that's all you can do.
All right. Well, let's introduce a few more insects that are now getting after it, you say, in lawn and garden settings. The elm leaf beetle. Remind us of what this is.
Well, the elm leaf beetle is actually more of a nuisance. Last year was the first year we've actually seen damaging populations on elm trees, American elms, and some of those other ones. But they actually come into homes, and now they're coming out and they're more of a nuisance pest. The beetles are out flying around, but they will feed on elm leaves like they did last year. So, if you have an elm tree, just be cognizant of the adults out there. They'll lay eggs. The females lay eggs, and you'll have these larvae feeding on the elm leaves, yeah.
On the foliage itself?
On the foliage, the leaves themselves, yes.
But what about treatment? Anything that one can do against those?
Once you see the adults feeding and the larvae, for sure, you can go out there spray with some type of contact insecticide, yeah.
And a general insecticide will get the job done?
Most general ones, yeah. Be very careful when the bees are out eventually. You don't want to spray when bees are out because, the pollinators are already suffering many other complex issues, but you want to get thorough coverage of all plant parts, especially leaf undersides, because that's where the larvae tend to feed.
That's against the elm leaf beetle now. Mm-hmm. So ants and termites are on the march as the weather ever so steadily warms up, you say?
Yeah, this is the time we start reproductives and the swarmers out there. Most of them are going to die, but the few that survive, the queen will get established for both the termites and ants, and then you'll have a colony. But most of those winged individuals are going to die out eventually. If you do have issues with termites or ants, you can give us a call or email us. Termites and ants are big enemies. You'll never see them together. The termites are the ones that damage the home, where the ants don't, other than carpenter ants might feed on wood. But you can contact a pest management professional now, and they'll be happy to provide you services on what to do with an ant or termite issue.
And just quickly here, the distinguishing indicators of ants versus termites, how to tell them apart.
Okay, morphologically, and that's a fancy term for parents, is that the antenna on an ant are geniculate or bent or elbowed, we call it. There's also on an ant between the thorax and the abdomen, the second, third parts of the body, there's a sort of a narrow waist. Termites are pretty well the same from head to abdomen. Mm-hmm. And termites don't have the geniculate antenna. And also, termites have the wings are the same, where the ants, the front wings may be longer than the hind wings, yeah.
So actually you can distinguish them from the other fairly handily.
Yeah, you just collect some, put them in some alcohol. Again, if you don't see the bent antenna, you do not have ants, you get termites.
And in the garden, the cucumber beetle is active now.
Well, they're getting ready to be active, Eric, and people are planting squash and pumpkins and any types of zucchini, those types. The spotted cucumber beetle and the striped cucumber beetle, overwinters adults, they will come out, and especially on young plants, they can cause damage two ways, by the direct feeding, but also both of those insects, which are beetles, are vectors of the bacterial wilted cucumber. And once a plant has bacterial wilt, it'll just start to die out eventually. So when you start seeing these beetles out there, it's going to be time to spray, because you got to protect those young squash, cucumbers, pumpkin, whatever, because they mostly feed upon before the adults feed. And that's where people put those row covers up. And when you plant your squash or whatever, people put row covers, and that keeps the adults from getting in and feeding on the squash plants.
But if they are out there, they're already feeding, general insecticide, once again, a contact product will take them out?
A liquid contact product. I don't recommend the dust because of the wind, and you don't get good coverage. So probably a liquid formulation of 7, which now has several active ingredients. It used to be carbaryl. Now they got permethrin, and I think there's another active in it. Again, spray in the early morning, late evening, not when the pollinators are out there.
So protect your squash, your cucumbers, those cucurbit vegetables against the cucumber beetle. 2 kinds, the striped and the spotted cucumber beetle, could well be out there now. Take a look in your gardening areas. Well, we'll have you back here in a few weeks and see what else is cooking in the way of lawn and garden insect pests. Appreciate it, Raymond.
Look forward to it, Eric.
He is Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist, K-State Research and Extension. That is this week's horticulture segment. And with that, our time's away for today. We appreciate you tuning in, as always, and welcome you right back here this same time tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.